Okay, great. Hello everybody, Mike Butcher. I'm the editor-at-large for TechCrunch. I hope you're having a good time here in Berlin. BlockShow. Actually, it's pretty good. Do you like those cartoons? I've always wanted to be a superhero, haven't you? Anyway, it's absolutely fantastic to be here. Now, crazily, we're not actually going to be talking much about startups in this section. We're going to be talking about the blockchain generally in terms of how it's developing being developed by businesses. And I have a marvellous panel to introduce to you. I'm going to be moved over here. I'm just going to go over here a little bit more. Now, to introduce everybody, just put your hand up when I read your name out. Artiona Bogo, who's a software engineer and member of SAP's blockchain team. Big round of applause, everybody. We have Antoine Verdon. Antoine? Hey.
He's on his way.
He's on his way. He's lost. Do you know, see, the thing is, you know, you can put on a conference, but you can't allow for lightning, can you? Now, Joost Volker, who's blockchain business development leader for Oracle. We have Frank Fu, angel entrepreneur. We have Eugéne Etsebeth. Eugéne, from all the way from sunny South Africa, who's an ex-central banker and heading up a payments unit. And we have Marc Taverner, finally, as well, who is now, Marc, I've lost you. Where have you gone? Global ambassador for Bitfury Group. Right. Now, if I can let's do a quick intro, and if you could each do 1 minute on what you're working on. Ah! Marvellous, you made it.
Morning.
Great to see you. Antoine? Yes, fantastic. From Proxeus and the co-founder of Sandbox, in fact. Very nice to meet you. Now, I'll tell you, if we go from this direction, let's hear from everybody. What are you actually working on in this space? Just do a quick minute on what you're doing. Go ahead.
So, it can happen that people in the room sometimes don't know. SAP can be the largest company ever that people still don't know that exists out there, but we have, so SAP provisions software, enterprise software for 378,000 customers worldwide, and just to put it to your perspective, 78% of the business revenue touched by various systems worldwide, touches an SAP system. So we're pretty huge, so to say, and in this context, in the context of the blockchain, let's call it hype at the moment or not. So it is our responsibility to help our customers towards the digital transformation journey. Consider blockchain also as a crucial part of this transformation journey. So what we do is help our customers transform cross-company business processes with blockchain, and we have a very concrete offering to do so, which is our blockchain service sitting on top of our SAP cloud platform. So this is pure infrastructure. Then on top of that, it's also providing the end-to-end applications that provide business value, and we're also doing that part. So we're active in two aspects. Right. First, infrastructure as a service, which is purely being technology agnostic on that perspective, so offering blockchain capabilities for our customers, infusing those in existing SAP applications, and then transforming, reimagining cross-company business processes with the blockchain.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Marc, what are you doing in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. So we got here. We didn't get struck by lightning, which is a minor miracle in itself for those of us that were flying. At Bitfury, we've been in this blockchain business for 8 years now. So we're one of the most established players in the market. We started off Bitcoin mining, and current day we process anywhere from 11 to 15% of the global Bitcoin or blockchain transactions. From that base, we've learned how blockchains work really well. And as well as maintaining the Bitcoin side of our business, where we design and manufacture semiconductors, we build data centers, portable data centers, and we sell our technologies to those who want to get involved in that space. On the software side, we're building solutions using a private permission blockchain for governments and large corporates around the world. The most often talked about solution that we have is for the government in the Republic of Georgia, where we've built a land registry service that now covers up to 60% of the land in the Republic of Georgia. So That's a short summary.
That's amazing. Thank you. Frank, what's your current activities?
Well, I am an investor myself, but I also work for several large companies in China, namely Kingsoft and most recently another company called Meitu, which we have over 560 million subscribers outside of China. So obviously blockchain technology is important, not only from the financial return perspective, since we invested in a company called OKEX, a Chinese exchange, back in 2013, but also from the enterprise level. We have such a large subscriber base, therefore we need a solution to engage our subscribers and also to make the data more valuable through analytics and through a distributed network. Privately, I'm also an investor. I recently invested in a company called MyDFS. It's a fantasy sports platform using blockchain technology to keep the data more transparent in the sports pool betting industry.
Right, actually, I think I'd like to pick up on that because fantasy sports and blockchain seem to be merging to some extent. Eugene, what are you up to at the moment?
Yeah, well, I left the rather boring and policy-driven world of central banks about a year ago, and now arrived at a very dynamic company. We've got over 250 customers in Africa, in over 20 countries. So straight off the bat, we sort of got some business cases together to get some mining rigs going. Half the developers there were already mining themselves, so it was quite an obvious transition. We also started setting up some relationships with trying to look at our cross-border remittances, more high-value payments. We had a lot of pan-African business with banks many banks across, almost like Santana, that are across Africa. So we're looking at that, and we also run some clearinghouses. We run the clearinghouse in Zambia, Kenya, which is over 40 banks, and then Lesotho, rather smaller. But because we're situated there, we're spending a lot of time on trying to, on proof of concepts, trying to build up blockchain-type solutions that will help clearing. But that's sort of falling more around the centralized direct debit mandates, etc. So that's what we're up to at the moment.
What a varied bunch you are. Right, next, let's go to Artiona. Sorry, Joost, sorry.
Yeah, so work with Oracle, which is, as a opinion, probably as well, a big unknown, but probably, I guess, Oracle from Java as well, kind of applications, business applications, platforms and sort of that. I think that's the space I'm in, actually. So I've been working for a long time in Oracle in emerging technologies, AI, IoT, and blockchain, and actually as well trying to bridge those three. I think that's a very interesting topic as well, and that's what we're working on at Oracle. Myself, I'm working across the Europe, Middle East, and Africa, so meeting a lot of customers on this. Actually, a lot of new technology we're trying to bring in. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is to see how blockchain as a phenomenon, how it can be supported by blockchain as a technology. And that's what we're trying to bring in here. I think the former speaker talked about scalability and performance, those kind of things. We try to bring into the game as well to see how blockchain actually, as well as how it fits in the larger enterprise scheme. So I think that's what we think blockchain we could add to the blockchain, to the new economy of blockchain.
Okay. And Antoine, how about you? What are you up to at the moment? What are your thoughts?
I'm a founder of Proxeus. It's a project that started in 2015, based on the realization that the blockchain ecosystem was a bit like the internet ecosystem 20 years ago. It was very difficult to program blockchain applications, and on the internet side, there were applications created like WordPress, for example, allowing anyone to very quickly put some blogs together and create a website. So our aim was to do the same for blockchain, and we created a very powerful workflow manager and document generator. We did an ICO in February to finance the project. We had a working prototype, and we've been working on some first use cases with Switzerland, where we built a company register for Switzerland as a prototype, reducing the time it took for incorporating a Swiss company from 10 days to 1 hour 37 minutes. We worked with...
Is that using blockchain?
Using blockchain,
right.
A high-quality smart contract to coordinate the work between the parties. We worked with the Swiss university to digitize their university certificates and make them verifiable on blockchain. We worked with last week on a really cool project with a Swiss car collector. He owns 250 old-timers and race cars, and we've been creating digital certificates for him with the aim to tokenize those cars in order to allow investments.
Blockchain is being used a lot in the collectibles world now, isn't it? As well, art, luxury as well. Let's sort of happy to throw open the discussion, but I mean it's quite a broad topic we've been set, but we can all talk about anything. To be honest with you, let's do what we like, what we feel. I mean, we've got Oracle, SAP people here. Where is it in terms of the enterprise adoption of blockchain right now? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're coming just after the New York City Blockchain Week, where a lot of announcements were made. I can, recapitulate a little bit on that. We announced that we are applying blockchain technology to agriculture supply chains in collaboration with giants. All the list of the consumers out there, part of this initiative is listed. Let's just not rename the names here. At BlockShow, it's more about the concept, and it's more about applying blockchain technology to transform or to reimagine agriculture supply chain so that consumers actually push their demand rather than being it a supplier-led kind of world. It should be about the consumer, right? So,
how would that work? That means I'm ordering directly from the farm or something. There's no middleman.
No, you should have visibility and transparency in terms of what the ingredients that make up the food you're consuming are about, and the whole history, like where were they actually produced.
So the provenance of the actual
provenance.
food.
So it's about visibility, transparency, and also track and tracing various parts across the supply chain among the players that actually produce the final consumer products. This is one lighthouse project. Then we are working to, those invoices that reach out you claiming to pay out to a certain IBAN account because you probably ordered a service or a product which you have never heard of. So those are kind of social engineering methods that hackers or attackers apply to actually trick people. On business, this happens much more. And treasuries sitting in each of the companies actually struggle out to identify fraudulent cases. So what we did is that we put together suppliers and buyers on a common single source of truth, on a shared repository to actually maintain supplier master data unanimously among them all. So this would tremendously avoid cases of fraud and at the same time improve a lot the processes of updating supplier master data among buyers and suppliers. We are teaming up with startups in this blockchain space because collaboration is key actually, and it's not only about being driven from the enterprise world itself, but it's also a lot about leveraging capabilities that startups are working out there. For example, we partnered with a Swiss startup Modum to also revolutionize and reimagine supply chain processes in the cold chain space. So, for example, those are situations where sensors are attached to packages and smart contracts, like, for example, in Hyperledger Fabric through chain code, you can trigger certain reactions based on the temperatures, whether those conditions are met or not. So a lot of lighthouse projects going on.
Very interesting. There's enormous amounts of activity. Marc?
So, do you mind if I just step in a moment and be perhaps a little controversial? So we've been around in this industry for quite some time, and we hear lots and lots of proof of concept spoken about, and we understand that the value of blockchain can be enormous, particularly in supply chain, where you can create a single source of truth, you can free up liquidity, you can help capital move around more quickly. you can attest to the provenance of products, and you can give a bit more power to the smaller player. But what we're finding actually in the enterprise environment is that there's a little bit of pushback at the moment. There's a bit of reticence to the adoption of this technology.
Why is that?
Because as you go a little bit further down the supply chain, for example, and you go from T1 at the top level down to maybe T5, T7, T8 to the smaller players, there becomes some sensitivity around data. Who owns the data? Who's going to reveal what data to which partner in the supply chain? Because that gives away just a little bit of negotiating power.
Yeah.
And then there are other sensitivities. I'm sure you guys come across them as well. You're smiling, perhaps you come across this in your workshops. But the incompatibility between systems. So now you're talking in the supply chain about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 different companies. And they might be using 3 or 4 different systems. They might have different data repositories. So from a Bitfury perspective, we see enterprise being, or enterprise adoption, being far stronger in the governmental sector. So in the government industry.
Because what? Because the platforms are simpler, there's less of them?
Because it's easier to issue a mandate at a governmental level,
right,
and just issue the mandate to say this is the direction in which we're travelling.
So governments are going to go faster in blockchain than private enterprise?
We've coined a phrase which we see, which we've used a number of times around the world, and those of you that have heard me speak before, forgive me. But so government as the innovator. So governments are almost showing the way, and then, I think for the first time in history, from an innovation perspective, dragging the small companies with them.
I would disagree with that, absolutely.
Oh, good.
Yeah, just for the sake of this panel, but to be honest, so I take the point of government. I think it's a totally different. For example, if we're talking about Dubai, absolutely agree. If we talk about Western Europe, disagree. No, it's a split in where, for example, talk about Africa, some countries really leading the way. So it's a very regional thing where the government, and particularly government actually is not, I would say it's in those places where the government is more than government. So if you take, for example, Dubai, the Dubai government, they rule also the supply chain. They rule the ports, they rule everything. So I think there's a difference in that. Where you would see, I think in government in Western Europe, you would see a pushback actually not privacy point. And that's exactly what you mentioned, actually in the enterprise space. And you just mentioned like the T7, etc. That privacy is exactly what they're concerned about, but what you mentioned as well, like the private blockchains, is actually where that's more or less being taken care of. So you can see this diversion of enterprise to look into both public and private. Can we combine those? Do we have to take one for the other? And actually, that's where I can see that government is lacking, because they have to take both into consideration. So that's and as such, be very careful about government being the initiative.
Eugéne, you were a central banker. Did you think that your government was innovating?
No, but that's a good answer. But I do see. I've been thinking a lot about the islands as well. You've got your Maltas and Mauritius. And these people, it's almost like a desperation spectrum where, how much are they willing to risk to take back, what was perhaps, where they were maybe a very big trading destination, in the medieval times. And so, I think it's going to be a very interesting play to this jurisdictional arbitrage, as you say, and especially around, a country like Dubai, who can fully change the entire nations, because it's under, it's led in a different manner.
Can I just come back on the government piece just very, very briefly? So I think there's a distinction that we need to make when we talk about types of blockchain, public and a private blockchain. Private blockchains you need to be super, super cautious about, because a private blockchain is not a single version of the truth. A private blockchain is only the truth whilst the people who control the nodes decide that they're going to act honourably. So that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing about governments is we see Western governments and we see Asian governments acting very powerfully, as well as in Africa. And it is an enabler. So if as a government, as a nation, you can use technology, which is accessible by most people, to create competitive advantage, then you will. So whether you're an island like Bermuda, Malta, Gibraltar, or whether you're a whole continent like Africa, I think the things that we need to be aware of in the West are that these nations, whether they're small or large, coming from behind the curve or acting out of desperation, are trying to use this technology to create a competitive advantage. So here in the West, we can sit here. How many of you know how to kill a frog? So how do you kill a frog is really quite simple. You put it in a pot of cold water on a stove, you heat the stove up quickly, and the frog doesn't realise that the world is changing. The water gets so hot that the frog dies.
That's a brilliant story, but it is actually a myth. Doesn't exist. But I take that point.
Poetic license.
Yes, poetic license.
Just one minor comment, since we're in Germany, I can say that the German government is very advanced on adopting blockchain technology. And what Marc, I think, refers to is the capability of major players to apply power to actually start on working on blockchain scenarios, which is very ironic because we say blockchain is there to actually distribute power. But the way how it starts is by being at the forefront, putting some players together on the same room, and sometimes we see that even competitors are together discussing applicability of blockchain scenarios. Because if you think that blockchain is there just to revolutionize or to reimagine business processes, you are missing out on the biggest potential of blockchain, which is the way how blockchain revolutionizes co-innovation. So we now see for the first time major competitors sitting in the same room and thinking how they can better collaborate with one another.
Assuming they can. Frank, from your perspective as an investor in startups and also as an observer of the space, do you think, how do you see this playing out? Do you think that the startups are going to run away at 1,000 miles an hour faster than any government body, of course? And surely that must be the case.
Well, so...
or corporate enterprise.
I spent a lot of time across US and China, and especially recently, as you noticed, there are a lot of Chinese investors, especially rootgrass investors, running into the blockchain industry. It's both good and bad, in a way that there are so many individual investors running into the scene, they created the hype, and there's so much money involved, and drive the market. It also is shortened learning curve. But government become extremely cautious because of the money involved, because of the potential money laundering, and they are just watching. I think they take the stand of observing for now, allowing some of the exchanges to still operate. OKEX, which we invested back in 2013, Huobi and Binance, for example, already moved over to Japan to operate, and later they also relocated to Malta. I think it's partly because everybody is trying to figure out how they want to position themselves. So before we actually see any standards in regulation or government positioning, it's going to be chaotic for a longer period of time. It's just like 10, 15 years ago when we see the mobile internet boom.
Antoine.
I think this point of learning how to position themselves and understanding how blockchain will impact different business models companies are working with are, for me, the main points blocking adoption at the moment, because it's such new concepts. It takes a lot of time to understand how blockchain will help structure new business models, and how the way we conceive applications today will be changed by blockchain. The way we see it, the architecture of blockchain applications will change entirely from traditional enterprise systems. We've seen that in the example I was mentioning before about this Swiss company register we worked on recently. A way to do the project in a traditional context would have been to have a very large architecture, very large projects with group permissions for the 5 types of actors relevant for creating a Swiss company, which are an entrepreneur, a lawyer, a notary, a bank, and the Swiss company register. And you would be able to create an application covering all those groups. You would set a lot of rules making sure that they know how to interact and that everything fits. And it would be a very long project that would take years and probably hundreds of people to build for a country like Switzerland. With blockchain, every actor has their own decentralized application, and they communicate via the blockchain. So I think that's what blockchain is going to change in the corporate setting. It's going to take away the large enterprise systems we have now and create small pieces. And that's, I think, the biggest power of blockchain for the next years, to be a layer interconnecting different proprietary systems that companies have. And that's mind shift.
Isn't there a problem that we are really so early in the piece to some extent that so many fundamentals are still being built that the technology itself, is evolving rapidly, and an enterprise trying to put in a company register system for a whole country, so it might quickly find itself effectively very out of date within months.
Yeah, I think there's an interoperability question here as well, which we kind of all dance around in our working lives, because if you're looking for an enterprise adoption of a blockchain system, then that implies a particular protocol. And as soon as you get more than 2 or 3 actors together who might have their own view on which blockchain they would like to use, you get into this rather bizarre situation where you're talking about something which doesn't exist at the moment, which is interoperability between blockchain platforms. A particular participant in the supply chain might choose flavor A, another participant might prefer flavor B just because that's what they've been sold, and you get these situations where potentially you have silos of data that can't talk to each other yet. So, I hate to say it, being a great exponent of the blockchain industry, we spent 8 years in it, but we still do have some challenges we need to overcome.
Right, exactly. I think you could see this well happen. For example, let's say messaging, whatever. We started some as well, and at the end of the day, sometimes you could see blockchain may go the fast route that EDI has taken over years. I think that's if you look from an enterprise point of view, that's how you look at it. And I can see the interoperability, but as well, I think what you should split as well is the way which blockchain you use and the way you're going to use data. I think that's the important thing here. If you talk about enterprise point of view, it's exactly what kind of data do you want to share that determines how you should build up your data. And then again, of course, and I take your point even as Oracle, we can see that some of our core systems, they might lose some of their capabilities that we may want to put on the blockchain. Some of the business logic that you would probably put in an ERP system. So, well, that's something we can put in a more common, the common knowledge. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that the enterprise systems will be less, but they may be less dominant in how they run the enterprises. But that's another way of looking at it, how you could do for interoperability, because you're just putting some of the logic, the smart contracts, the chain code on there. I think that's for enterprise an interesting change. That instead of having those 4 different systems, which they can communicate, they do today. The world is run by systems, so it's not that something stops if we introduce blockchain or something goes totally different or dramatically different. But we're probably going to put some of the decision making in a different way. Yeah. And in that sense, it's not about the interoperability. It's about that people would like to collaborate in a new system. Yeah, that's where.
At SAP we see it exactly like this. So we think that blockchain will not make ERP systems disappear. The world will still need powerful systems that are able to store business transactions, so mission critical data on an ERP system. So, and I think that you at Oracle share the same view. Rather, we see blockchain, and this is really like you have to work inside the enterprise world to fully grasp this. So we think blockchain is a complementary layer to existing and established business processes. At some times, it could happen that blockchain would change those business processes or would kind of push the need for reimagination of those business processes. But it's rather a complementary layer that brings together various parties on sharing a single source of truth. Because we think that permission blockchains are still there to help the enterprise world, and there can be a little bit of a kind of controversy here with the public chains as well, but yeah. So with regards to interoperability and deploying applications to a shared network, that's still work in progress.
Right.
It's still being figured out.
I'd love to hear from all of you. What are some of the most exciting implementations of this technology that you've seen so far? Got a company register, but I'm sure there's more exciting things. I think that we might actually end up disrupting how agriculture, and perhaps making agriculture more sustainable. That would be cool, wouldn't it?
Ethical supply chains as well.
For heaven's sake, the planet's dying and we need to sort some of this stuff out.
Yeah.
What are some of the more interesting projects you guys have seen?
So, Mike, can I give you an example from the supply chain? So we were working on a supply chain project with a timber manufacturer, and this particular company's role in life was to certify that the timber was coming from a sustainable source, to certify that the timber was of a certain quality, and then to work gathering those papers that were required to take that particular piece of timber from, let's say, the Amazon to Amsterdam, where it was going to be consumed. So we started dutifully looking at the business logic, laying out an approach for blockchain that would add value. And what we found was that, yes, we shortened the amount of time that was required from an administration perspective. We reduced some of the paperwork, we freed up some liquidity. But the really, really interesting piece that came out of this was that we identified almost a new business. So there was a small artisanal manufacturer, a craftsperson, in a very small country. And what they had been doing was taking a piece of timber that was of high quality coming from a sustainable source, and they were crafting in their spare time little pieces of furniture. So a stool, a little newspaper rack, some coasters to put your cups on, whatever it might be. And as soon as we started to touch on them, this particular individual picked up this thought and said, hang on a second, if I've now got a certificate on the blockchain that allows people to understand this timber is coming from a sustainable source, is of the highest quality, then does that mean I can sell my produce for more? And could I find a new audience? So they started selling to high net worth individuals in Manhattan.
Right.
A crafted piece of stool out of very high quality timber from sustainable sources. And they went a step further and they put each item that they constructed on the blockchain as well. So now we've got the catalogue of work which is referenceable, back to your point about high value items, and this individual went from just selling little bits that they could nickel out of a piece of timber for relatively low prices, to a repositioned pricing policy which was at the premium end with a new audience and an online catalogue, from a point where we were just trying to simplify the supply chain.
So, all because of the immutability of the blockchain.
Absolutely, yeah.
And being able to prove that it was sustainable, etc. That could, well,
that's great, because it changed someone, literally changed
I should be becoming a woodworker next week, I think. Anyone else?
Pharmaceutical supply chain as well, because drug counterfeit is a serious problem, particularly in the US. So pharma manufacturers came together on an implementation done together with SAP to share those QR codes, which are imprinted on each of the packages, because of the newly enforced law that came into power in November 2017, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act that enforces all of them to imprint this QR code. This is the sellable returns problem. So pharmacists, the clerk sitting at the pharmacy, he can get a package coming back with the claim of being resold, like that, pretending that that's the original one. So now, how do we know as a consumer that we're getting the original drug and that's not a counterfeit, for example? This is a huge problem in the US.
Yes, counterfeit drugs are a real problem. Yeah.
So it's the same concept of supply chain, but applied to pharmaceuticals, for example.
I think that point to the counterfeit, and so we do a lot of business in Africa. We see a combination of counterfeit, actually, so health. We talk about in Africa we talk probably close to 90% of medicines having probably a suspicion of being counterfeit. So that's really that could take down health overall if you improve that health. And second, what you see a lot is actually how we can improve democracy. And that would be great if blockchain would help. It's not that we bring democracy, but that countries themselves can see, okay, if I put blockchain in there, and I think that's the great leap forward, that they can say, well, just forget about all the systems. We can put a new system in place, which at least helps us as well to counterfeit our internal fraud and fraudulent happening. And if those things come together, I think blockchain can really change some economies. I think that would be great. And that's, I would say, and that's exactly where government and enterprise come together, because it's not the government who's going to issue this, it's not an enterprise, but if the government provides the opportunities, then enterprise will grow the business in those countries. And that's where you can see exports easier, easier to start your business in some of the countries. I think that would be great. That's some of the case we're working on. I hope to be at the moment that we can see some of the countries really raised up and become great.
It could be transformational for emerging markets, couldn't it?
Only if the governments drive it. And I come back to my point. If you think about what happened with the internet, I mean, the internet was a beautiful thing, is a beautiful thing. But for those of us that are old enough, I know I don't look it, but I remember when the pictures dropped down line by line and it would take 15 minutes before you could see your picture of a giraffe in Africa, right? And it was those countries where the governments had the foresight to drive out high-speed internet connections and begin to create clusters that gave birth to the fantastic companies that we see today. It wasn't in those locations where it were the enterprises that said, this thing called the internet, we're going to build a .com, because the infrastructure wasn't there. So governments, I go back to my point, play a critical role here in driving the adoption of blockchain, not just for the infrastructure, but also the use cases, the legislation that we've been talking about. And you ask about interesting applications, Mike. I'd just like to come back to our heritage, which is cryptocurrency, and where we started. So the world's largest application of blockchain so far, which is Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, 0 to 8 years, over $200 billion market worth, 1,400 cryptocurrencies, and in the period of 1 year, this notion of ICOs, or initial coin offerings, went from virtually nothing to raising more for entrepreneurs than the whole VC industry provided in its entirety. So I do think that there are some really interesting applications out there. And we shouldn't overlook the work that's already been done in our rush to try and sanitize or clean blockchain. Right? We should hold on to some of that learning and heritage that has been gathered in the world of cryptocurrencies.
Yes, exactly. But let's also not mine the heck out of the planet at the same time, to the point where, electricity is burnt up all the time. We need to move, obviously, to proof of stake and other technology, third generation.
I would just urge the audience to do a little bit of research on how much power the Visa network consumes.
Right. I think that debate will probably carry on, right?
Or gold mining.
Some time.
Or gold mining.
Yes.
What are some of the other thoughts about this subject? Is it the case, though, you mentioned cryptocurrencies, and that in the enterprise environment, they've got a big problem. There's a huge war for talent at this point, and the private sector, startups in particular, are mining the talent far faster than any public sector entity. What's the incentive for people to go and work on a corporate blockchain when they could be becoming the next Vitalik Buterin or something?
Or the next Bitfury.
Yes.
But I saw it firsthand at the central bank where a couple of years ago we were creating a South African blockchain consortium and we were trying to get a smart contract together with all the banks. And I was trying to find some like-minded individuals in the bank, but more technical. And it was a very difficult endeavor. I eventually had to settle just for some people who were reasonably good developers. And the contrast between that institution and then all the banks where they were slightly more avant-garde and more keen and on the cutting edge of technology. But I think this is going to play out even more, over the next few years. I don't think, even when I look at the fintech hub that the South African Reserve Bank has, it has 3 people in it. I don't think it's going to be able to keep up with this burgeoning.
I think, we're going to be, there's at least another couple of years more of this boom to go, to play out.
So maybe there are people here in the audience that are asking themselves the same question as you, Mike. So where they should go, to the startup world or to the corporate world. So I personally, I am the corporate person here, previously at Hewlett-Packard, now at SAP. I truly enjoy working on concrete projects with customers, and those examples I made before. That's real work, that's a lot of insight, that's knowing how the world runs today. That's a huge opportunity. I consider myself very lucky to be part of SAP's blockchain team. Yeah. And I am fully enjoying it, having a blast actually, because yeah, when I think of the ICO world and what's going on, of course that's exciting, a lot of opportunity out there, but we have a lot of work to make this happen, and I feel like I can contribute more and quicker in the corporate world together with our customers, helping them to push forward blockchain adoption. So that's
Your PR team will love you for that statement. They'll be very happy that...
they're not even sitting here. So.
They'll be watching it back.
That's perfect. So I think there's so much talent around. I think everybody will pick his talent. I think that's absolutely interesting though. You're going to see the same years ago when we had started e-commerce, a lot of new business. Those new businesses have grown to be corporates or vendors, whatever. Actually, look, for one example, I think, look at folks in the fintech, you could say the ING Bank is probably now one of the most, the most forefronting bank, if you look at the new technologies. So they have, I think, they have a superior team of developers. So it's where but there may be a time. I would say as well, of course, it's like a pendulum. Where it's going to be the most exciting business to jump on, and there's definitely in this world there's a lot. I think that what the difference probably is that in some individuals you can make a bigger change. I think that's where you can see. And from a sales where I can see what the enterprise world is actually bringing things together. Just talk about AI. That's something that will bring really big things together. That's something which I probably would see in the enterprise world happening faster.
You're right, yeah. The incorporation of AI, well, they've got the data, haven't they? You need data, doing machine learning and AI, and then off you go. Well, Antoine?
On the war for talent side, I definitely see this point with all of our partners and customers. I think the answer is that it's going to be very difficult to find high-skilled technical talent to work on blockchain projects in-house. If people are not doing their ICOs, they want to have their own consultancies and charge very high fees for advice. And the way we try to position ourselves and others is we think that there will be in the future toolboxes, and that's part of what we offer, to allow corporates to go one hurdle down on the technical side and be able to focus more on the business processes. Because I think at the end that's where corporates should be able to focus on what blockchain, what impact blockchain should have in their business and how they want to structure that from the business side. And I'm sure if SAPs or other companies, us and a few others, provide those toolboxes for enterprise, it will be much easier in the future for corporates to do that. They will not have to hire in-house talent anymore, but they will be able to rely on systems that will be provided by others.
I don't think that enterprise is really innovative. That's why you don't see innovation from Microsoft, from IBM, although they try to make a stake in the blockchain technology. I think you see most of the innovation from the private sector, from the startups, because the enterprise have their baggages, they have their inherited issues, and eventually dinosaur will disappear. But enterprise can innovate by acquiring companies. They have the money, they have the power, they have the leverage. So I think what they should do is do their best by investing and by acquiring those innovative teams. Teams like MyDFS, which only has 16 people, but they're making a difference. It's a $7.2 billion industry in just North America alone, 65 million subscribers, players in this industry. However, Supreme Court just broke down a New Jersey law banning the sports betting last week, 2 weeks ago actually, making the industry a $100 billion market. That's how a small team, a small innovation team can make the difference.
Right.
M&A is not the only way to innovate for enterprises. So it's not the only model to actually acquire a team of 18 or 20 people. Actually, another very good option to innovate and stay at the forefront is to actually use the protocols which are being developed by those startups out there.
Well, IBM obviously is also pushing this Hyperledger platform, isn't it?
It's not IBM's. It's an initiative of the Linux Foundation where IBM contributed a lot of source.
They're pushing it.
But I think that's an interesting foundational pillar to our point of view, which is that the open source movement should allow enterprises to gain easier access, and not just enterprises, but anybody. So if you're a young 15-year-old, my son is just sitting down there at the moment, you could pick up the whole of our blockchain protocol Download it on GitHub.
Yeah.
Get all of the documentation and be off. Build your own application under the Apache 2 license. Create a commercial derivative of that, which you have total control over, and Bitfury has no lien over. That's all. I think that open source principle is a core principle that will help adoption. And then I think the other thing that you mentioned earlier, which is collaboration, even between competitors, is a way to begin creating those applications. Because if you're working with a competitor to build on top of an open source platform, and you understand what the objective is between two competitors, then as the person that's ultimately owning that application, this is how we look at the world, you will have ownership of it. You might just be working with your competitor for a short period of time. In our instance, 6 to 8 weeks, which is all it takes us to build a reasonable application on top of our blockchain, and then we pass over ownership of that. And if during that period some of that knowledge is transferred to your existing team, then you begin to have control over your application. This notion of walled gardens, I think, is something which is very old school. Open source will help drive adoption, and collaboration between competitors is absolutely a must.
Can I comment on that one? Because I think you're taking a stand here which is absolutely incorrect.
Oh,
so what you're doing
surprised me.
Oh, it surprised me that you're putting this in the face of this audience. Because you say walled gardens is not open source, and that's absolutely not true. Because if you look at the Hyperledger, that's open source, that's Linux Foundation. And if SAP, IBM, Oracle, they're all based on Hyperledger for blockchain cloud service. So the biggest three all take an open source, actually as the foundational technology to build new corporate systems. So that's the first one. Secondly, I think that's exactly, if you look at a lot of the corporates, they have embraced open source exactly for very good reasons. The thing is, how you now can take what open source has brought us of collaborative development into the corporate world, securing, for example, privacy, IPRs, interconnectivity, interoperability. I think, and that's exactly where you can see where open source and corporate development come together. And that's just where innovation does happen, because this is where people who understand how to run a large business run it with what we've learned from the open source world. So open source is not controversy corporate, and it's not controversy to walled gardens. And that's what you're stating here, which is absolutely untrue.
Perhaps I might find some common ground between you two, that to the extent that this whole new world of blockchain is actually driving a lot of more collaboration between public and private and open source and enterprise, shall we say, because it's so new. And effectively, and blockchain is ultimately, at the protocol layer, there's enormous amounts of collaboration, because you're talking about protocols. You're not talking about, one sort of server talking to another server anymore, are you? It's a very different world.
Well, I think there's a different world, but it's a different world if you say we're talking about access to the open source, access to develop together, versus access to the data which is on the blockchain. And I think that's the distinction. And for the enterprise, of course, what's the access to the data which is on there? And the big challenge for enterprise, how can I combine what I do with my customers with what I do with my partners? I think that's a big challenge, and how you can bring us together. But I think the open source is not the topic. Because, as just mentioned, the biggest blockchain corporate systems are built on open source systems.
So open source is not an issue here. I think you're right, and you're right. However, enterprises, especially large enterprises, have too much hidden agenda. They always wanted to have something proprietary within the open source, so they can have a little bit of an edge. If you talk to Apple, if you talk to Google, Facebook, are they going to open up their data? Are they going to share with millions of the enterprises around the world and startups? No, they won't. Because they want to have that advantage over others. So by nature, they're not going to open up. I think that's why I personally think that startups will succeed eventually.
So the question is, how did Apple, Google, Oracle start? All as a startup.
Absolutely, exactly. I agree with you.
Well, this conversation will run somewhere. There is a conference where a bunch of enterprise people are arguing with each other about open source. Right, we're going to have apparently I'm allowed to do Q&A with the audience, if I can even see anybody.
Over there.
Hand over there.
This gentleman over there.
Apparently we do Q&A, is that
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
How are we going to run it?
How are we going to run it? So we have some mobile mics here, the ladies with the orange blocks in their hands.
All right.
So I would say we have time for maybe...
We've got 10 minutes for Q&A. Come on, we've got one over there. Go for it.
Hello, Andrea Bauer from D-Block.
You're going to have to literally put a thing...
In front of my...
That's better. Better.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I was wondering how the Chinese are thinking about GDPR. It just started last week, actually, and I think you all guys are affected of it. You're global players, so how does it affect your solution and your perspective on blockchain solutions, actually?
Blockchain and GDPR.
Blockchain and GDPR.
Well, there we go. God love you.
Well, it's probably a whole conference in itself, right? But I think at this point we should note that it's not advisable to put data onto the blockchain in the same way as we think about databases at the moment. Think about the blockchain as a guide, an audit trail of what's happening when, rather than being as a database.
The answer is rather easy. Never put personal data on the blockchain. All our pilots, for example, are GDPR compliant. That's not really a big issue if you know how to design the application.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say we're working a lot of customers on exactly the same thing, and actually it's about that GDPR happens actually where data sits. I think that's important. So the blockchain is important. Think about the hashing, think about the encryption, think how you hook up to this. If you make that solid, it's GDPR compliant. Think about the right to forget. Even that is something you can implement in blockchains. Because although it might, the audit trail, as you mentioned, is still there, it doesn't say that you can still take out the link to where it points where the data sits. So you take out the link, you have the audit trail that someone once put up some data, but you can't access the data anymore. That's very simply put. I think it is more complex, of course, to implement. Very simply put. It might be easier to solve if you think about how data is being captured and being stored.
We've been working on ways to make data GDPR compliant using blockchain. The data is stored always off-chain in the relevant country, but we use smart contracts to give access and to make people directly being able to access the data.
I think that's a good point. That we see probably from a agency point of view, they probably will inspect more how the chain code or the smart contract is GDPR compliant. If that itself has enough, I would say, built-in, so I think it's definitely for developers very important. Study how you build a real good smart contract, because in there you can as well apply how data is being stored, being captured, and even being aged. So I think the smart contract is probably the answer to GDPR compliance. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, two more here. We've got one at the front. Go for it.
Good morning, my name is Peter Zimmerman from Private Wealth Management, and just want to ask about the connection between the real world and the blockchain. So far I didn't see, how did you find answers to this question or to this problem? I see the problem that it might be that some people are not serious and are putting into the blockchain not correct data. So when it comes to, the timber, maybe the timber is not from sustainable sources,
how do you allow people lying on the blockchain? You're putting incorrect data on the blockchain.
That's the link between the analog world and the digital world that needs to be figured out in many scenarios and to be as closer to the reality as possible. But you're right, in some cases blockchain won't solve it for you. So the link needs to be properly defined by humans.
Anyone else?
It just comes down to notarization, which is the description of how you can verify that you've got as close to the truth as you can. And blockchain doesn't solve every problem. We reject 96% of all of the use cases that get brought to us simply because blockchain is just not applicable for them. And other people can work on those that we reject. We prefer just to work on the ones where there is real validity on the case.
That's right.
But you can't, it's just like any database. If you put rubbish in, I'm using the polite version here, if you put rubbish in, you'll get rubbish out.
Part of the answer is in the connection between assets and crypto identities.
Yeah.
If you blockchainize an asset, then there is no way to tell if that asset is correct or not. But if you connect it with an identity of the manufacturer or the reseller or the owner, then you're able to make that link and increase chances of having a real.
Hopefully, at the end of the day, you do actually genuinely have a wonderful hand-carved coffee mat that's actually genuinely from the Amazon rainforest. Go on. There's a question there.
Yeah, you briefly touched on interoperability on the one hand and open source on the other. But what about standards? As the European Union is currently developing standards with regard to blockchain, what do you think is the role the enterprise environment should have in setting standards?
So the European Union, I don't believe, is developing standards at the moment. What they've formed is an observatory. And the role of that observatory is to do exactly what the title suggests, which is to spend an amount of time with a very wide range of industry players, learning about how the European Parliament needs to think about blockchain. So I don't think we're going to see any legislation coming out of the European Parliament anytime soon. But they've started what is a really robust process. We are a contributor to that. And any of you who are interested in this space should come along to any one of the events in Brussels. In fact, if you look up a European MEP, Eva Kali, and follow her on Twitter or just look at what she's announcing, you'll be able to join in that. But the standards is a topic, and the development of standards is a topic which does, as I mentioned, need to be addressed in our opinion, and the European Blockchain Observatory is a really good starting point.
My opinion is whoever have the largest subscriber base, and whoever have the largest community of developers will become the standard. So market will speak for itself.
Exactly. Next questions or final questions, anyone? There's one right over here. You got something? There we go.
Hello, my name is Nick. I'm from Apla. When we are working and bringing our protocol in UAE and other countries, we see that in the end of the day, there are system integrators who will implement and help clients to establish blockchain. But these days, lots of system integrators that don't have knowledge on how to make a proper blockchain strategy. Could you please comment on what's the proper way of tech companies who are owning the technology and system integrators who are establishing IT infrastructure? What's the best way for collaboration within the enterprises?
So maybe I can take this, since this has already happened. So there have been cases where the startup itself offered to do the system integration for us. So they were offering a very concrete solution, and that would be like an additional layer sitting and talking to our blockchain layer for a particular customer, for example, and they offer to do the system integration themselves. But this is rather an indicator that the market should bring up to the table. If there is a need to actually integrate your solution to SAP solutions, that would identify itself as a problem, and someone will pick it up and do it for you or for us. In cases where we see that there is value in actually adopting your solution, we even do it ourselves inside the team, for example, and we think of how can we actually make this project move forward. This is really the startup enterprise collaboration that I was hinting at before, which is very important to drive innovation and adoption.
I think on the system integrators, which actually their origin, and as well, I think the blockchain that you just mentioned, like chain code or smart contract, I think that's something which you could say probably people who have maybe a BPM background could probably step in there. You know, they can help, but I think as well on the coding side, so it's bringing those things together. Some systems have those people, some don't. We also work with small startups who bring in specific knowledge. I think that system integrators will learn to adopt those things, and they need to look at exactly what they've been doing in the past. They really need to change as well their business model in this sense. What I would see for system integrators exactly is that they might focus on exactly where blockchain probably is going to change processes, and that's where integration happens. They may not so much focus, of course, where blockchain is building totally new economies, etc., because that may take a different approach. I think that's good for both, but they should look exactly where their strength is. It's probably in the integration, it's probably in the BPM set, and somewhere in the coding side. That will be their place, I suppose.
Well, hopefully they'll figure it out at some point. But I think we're running out of time. So if I could ask you to say thank you very much to our panel. And I hope you have a good day. Thank you very much.